Howdy folks, this is the Comic Cowboy with the brand spanking new video for you, and thank you for joining. If you're a first-time viewer, please subscribe, and if you're already participating in the channel, I welcome you back and I thank you for your support. Today I'm going to talk briefly about graded video games. And I'm going to approach this, of course, through the lens of the comic book space, because that's what I focus on and that's the experience I have as a collector. And I will provide the caveat for you right now. I am no expert in collectible video games. I got into this category myself about 14 months ago. I started picking up some of these slabbed video games. Because I thought it was an interesting emerging space, and I happen to be a gamer and I know the titles, and I've worked in the video game space before. I was at Electronic Arts for 8 years. I worked at Blizzard, the company that made World of Warcraft. I was there actually right when they shipped WoW, so I've worked a lot of my career in the video game space. And so when this started to emerge as a collectible category, it felt very natural for me to participate in it, and I felt that somewhat of an advantage because I just knew the game franchises. I knew the titles. I could remember what the Metacritic data was. I think what was an aha moment for me is I didn't know all the shitty games, and I don't mean that to be pejorative, because there's a lot of collectible games, whether that is all the way back on the NES platform or even the Atari. I've got an example of that here, all the way through the modern era platforms, you know, the PlayStation through the Xbox. There's a lot of games that you would not want to play and that were not critically well received, but nevertheless have a lot of collectible value to them. Maybe it's the box art, maybe it is the rarity of the title. I suspect that would be the case. And there are potentially some, I guess, cult games or games that have a really fervent niche. So nevertheless, I'm just telling you, I really don't know the collectible game space. I really don't have anything sort of particularly illuminating to say, other than I wish to revise my thesis that I had several months ago, that at the time there was a decline, and there to some extent still is, right? A bit of a decline in Silver Age and Golden Age keys. And this is an important issue. You know, as a collector, it's something I'm concerned with. I'm sure it's something that all collectors are concerned with, because not only do you have the books in hand, right? You've made investments. You're probably, like myself, continuing to buy. And overall, I remain very optimistic on the collectible comic space. But I do think some things have occurred in this category of during the last 4 to 6 months that we have not seen prior, right? So there's some factors at play. I mean, if you've collected the books and you got into collectible comics anytime in the last 10 years and you bought titles, you're doing really well. They've done nothing for the most part but increase in value, outpacing inflation considerably, right? So when the books decline, when you see Amazing Spider-Man 1 from '63 decrease in value, that is something of concern. When you see Amazing Fantasy 15 somewhat decrease in value, when you see Jim 83 have a slight downturn, although the book has recovered quite a bit, it's a thing of concern. You wonder what's going on. I mean, even the last big auction that just closed on Heritage, the Captain America comics from the Golden Age, I forgot what shape it was in, maybe it was a 3.5. That sold somewhere in the ballpark of tens of thousands less expensively than it did in an auction that was held not that long ago. Same with All-Star Comics 8, first appearance of Wonder Woman. That book has been on the decline. Why? I don't know. I have a hypothesis that it's a combination of factors, and I do think to some extent, although it's really hard to show the data, that there is definitely a correlation between what's happening in the collectible game space today and what is happening with respect to prices with vintage slabbed comic books in the auction space, right? So we're talking about Heritage, Comic Link, Comic Connect, and then of course we have eBay, right? What happened in early in February is these books started to, as I mentioned, depreciate slightly in price, somewhere in this 5 to 10% range. Now, some of that has recovered, some of it has not, and this happened pre-COVID. So you have to ask yourself, like, what's going on, right? And I probed and I asked a lot of folks that are on the CGC boards that have been there for years, and there's some men and women that have been on the boards going on 10, 15 years. I joined the CGC boards as atomized in 2013, and I feel like I'm a newbie. That board and that community has a lot of seniority to it. It's great. It's a great resource. Nevertheless, I really couldn't get a consistent answer when I asked various dealers why these books were coming down, other than stay the course and they will likely recover, which I guess is fine, but it was really hard to identify why they took a bit of a hit, pre-COVID, mind you. What was the case, right? Is it some sort of general fatigue? And then there were some other theories. Some folks had this idea that they were simply due for a correction, but like, what's that based on? Why now, right? I mean, the books have been going up for 10 straight years. I mean, if you bought a Hulk 1 or Hulk 181 or any of a Jim 83 or even a Showcase 22, I mean, any of these books, whether it's Marvel or DC, Fantastic Four 1 and X-Men 1, these books have been done nothing but appreciate in value like a hockey stick of growth over the last 10 years. So like, why in January of 2020 do they suddenly go down? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I have some ideas on what might be the case. The first one is the obvious one, was the movies, right? When the Avengers ended their sequence of films, there naturally is a little bit of a hangover after that experience has ended, because we're talking about the culmination of years and years of these wonderful films, whether it was the Avengers films themselves or the films that had elements of the MCU that pointed towards the culmination of the Avengers, whether that was the Cap films or the Thor films or the Iron Man films or the Spider-Man pictures. Like, these were all wonderful, wonderful cinema, and I don't care what Marty Scorsese says, these are great films. I mean, there are a few duds in there, but on the balance, the production value and the writing and the storytelling it's just top notch, right? So all that somewhat came to a little bit of a conclusion. Now, here's the funny thing about that, right? We're entering a moment where Hollywood doesn't really yet know how to get back into production, right? That's the issue. The issue isn't the material like the Black Widow that's probably already in the can, right? The issue is being able to get to a set with your director of photography and your cast and your director and your crew in a variety of locations, and to be able to shoot this material. So there has not been a revised slate, as far as I know, from the studios with respect to when they're going to release these films, if they're not already in the editing lab, if they're not already, so to speak, in the can, right? Although they shoot it digitally now, in the can was a reference when they shot it on 35mm film and it was in the canister. Nevertheless, we don't know when we're going to see these films. So I do think that is of concern, because the movies, the cinema, to a much lesser degree, the television, pushes the prominence of the superhero universe and does directly impact and push north the value of the books big time. You can, I mean, there are just so many examples of this to point out for you. They are numerous. Just the fact that there has been rumors that Doctor Doom may finally appear on the silver screen has pushed Fantastic Four 5 up and up and up in value over the last 8 months. It was always a great book. It was always a really important key. It's the films that drove up the value of that book recently, right? So there is really no underestimating how quickly things can move and appreciate once the wheels of Hollywood are turning. And also, Disney is a little bit of a wild card. And I mention that because they may push franchises to the small screen through Disney Plus, and that's disadvantageous to the collector because the impact on the small screen is quite a bit less than the silver screen, always has been, right? Even with a character like the Martian Manhunter, who appeared for the first time in the Supergirl film, not films, the television program, right, on CW, it pushed up for a small period of time Detective Comics 225, which is a great book. It's the first appearance of the Martian Manhunter. Great, tough book to get in anything above like probably a 3.0. That book actually did take off for a bit, and it's just come back down, right? It wasn't really a sustained move. Now, if the Martian Manhunter shows up in a film, that's a different ball game. So we don't know when they're going to get back on the lot and start shooting these pictures, which sucks because we don't know when that Flash film's going to come out, right? If you're into video games, you don't know when that Drake's Fortune picture will finally start getting into production. Stuff is getting pushed out, and Disney is a very diversified company, so they don't have all their eggs in one basket. So they could roll back what they're doing in cinema and spend more time in animation with Pixar and those types of films and pictures and push more content onto television. So there's just a lot of variables there. Point I'm making, there's a lot of variables that might be contributing to why books, to some extent, early in the year started to depreciate slightly, and granted, it's picked up a bit lately, which, hallelujah, I'm a collector. I like when this stuff goes up. I don't want it to go too deeply down because I get a little concerned, as you probably do, about your holdings, right? Because you could always elect not to buy, but you're holding a lot of books currently, right? So the other thing I noticed, and I made a video about this a few months ago, and I actually think I was wrong, or I didn't know enough about the space. And now I've been buying video games, and I've been sort of participating in some of the Facebook communities, like the Show Your Wada games, which is really cool. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of folks that know the space that are writing material there that I can learn. I could tell you on YouTube, without identifying the specific channels, there is really not a lot of information out there that I find helpful, meaningful, and optimistic, right? I don't need everything to be cheer-led, but most of the material that I watch when I go on YouTube when I want to learn about retro video games comes from this somewhat of a defensive space and a kind of a strange posturing that doesn't really resonate with me. I prefer collectors to approach it with a little bit of exuberance, and they're probably not participating, right? So if you're not participating in the collecting and you're opining on it, that's fine. I just don't really find that too compelling. So I did a video and I said that there really wasn't much of a difference in what was happening in the comic space with respect to what was happening in the collectible game space, and now I think differently about it. I really think there is, for a variety of reasons. I'll show you some of the games here. I don't want to talk and talk without showing you some cool visual material. I have been buying the slabbed games. I don't just buy the superhero stuff. I buy other franchises as well. I do like the superhero material. I think a lot of people do. And this X-Men, Uncanny X-Men from the NES platform, I don't remember the game, to be honest with you. In this really nice showing, 7.5 is a particularly nice title. And here is Spider-Man. I don't think it's versus the X-Men. Spider-Man and X-Men Super Nintendo on the SNES is really cool, and a 9.2. I'm not going to get into this topic. I mean, there's been a lot of people that have opined about what's going on with the Atari 2600 Spider-Man. Here it is in 9.6 condition, factory sealed with the A++ on the seal. I did buy this copy. I don't mind sharing this information with you. What difference does it make? I bought this off Comic Connect. So Comic Connect sells slabbed games. You can go to their site now. They've got a bunch of buy it now lots. Prices are, I think, pretty good. I picked this thing up for $2,000. So when the copy, the 9.8 copy sold in the Heritage lot for around $9,000, that was a pretty big price. And I just went to Comic Connect's site probably the next day, and I saw that they had a copy available in 9.6 for $2,000. I thought, you know, $9,000 on a 9.8, $2,000 on a 9.6. You know, that's a pretty big delta. And it was actually turned out to be a pretty good pickup, because the 9.6 has actually sort of found some steady ground, probably around $2,500 to $2,800. So I still think my $2,000 is well protected in the plastic here. And it's kind of a fun game to have. I don't remember this game for the 2600. I grew up with the 2600 and the Intellivision and the ColecoVision. I did not play this game. It may have sucked. But I'm careful not to disparage Atari, because you can't look at these games through the lens of modern gaming. It's just entirely unfair. I can tell you, and it may be the case for yourself, if you're of the age where you played on this platform originally, the 2600 was a revelation. I mean, it was joy playing on that system. I mean, there are some shitty titles, no doubt, but by and large, I mean, it was an incredible experience in gaming, at least for myself. We couldn't afford the Intellivision console in my house. I had to go over to a neighbor's house to play the Intellivision. I did eventually get the ColecoVision, which was a piece of shit. But there's a couple good games on ColecoVision. It's getting a little hot in the lights. You know, I shoot this video here with some lights in the living room for the quality of the video. Now, the point I'd like to make here with this material, here's the GTA 2. I think this is fun. I just think GTA is a great franchise, so I picked up GTA 2 in 9.2 condition. There is, and it's hard to actually find the data to support it, a correlation between what's happening in the comic space and what's happening in the collectible game space. The two are connected. Why? Well, the auction houses that are selling the books are selling the games in the same darn auction, right? Maybe they separate it by a day, but they bundle it all together. In fact, I was going to consign some books to Comic Link, which I've done many times over the year. They're fine chaps there. I consign at most of the auction houses. And then I thought, oh, okay, I want to consign some games over to Certified Link, right? So their sister site. So you've got Comic Link, and then they've got Certified Link. Certified Link does collectible coins. They do, of course, the graded video games. They also do Magic the Gathering cards. They do a little bit of Pokemon. They do some sports cards. They bundle it all together. Recently, they're becoming much more well known for the games. So I reached out to my contact at Comic Link, and I said, hey buddy, I also got some video games that I want to consign in the Certified Link auction. Can you put me in touch with whoever's over on that side so I could work with them, right? This is my contact at Comic Link. And he said, oh, that's me. Like, cool, right on. What do you got? Send them my way, right? So it's the same dude, right? And you know, it's the same business. It's the same company, right? So like they're interchanging the material and promoting and marketing the material to basically the same user base. Now let's look at Heritage, or let's talk about Heritage for a minute. The game still first started showing up in the Sunday auctions. They since moved them to Monday night, but it's still bundled together with that auction. Did they bundle together movie posters and comic books? Did they bundle together collectible records and comic books? Did they associate cause artwork with comic books? They didn't do any of that stuff. They put the comic books and the video games together, brother. They are in the same auction, right? So I can tell you, when I go into these auctions and I'm collecting both categories, I've got somewhat of a budget I'm working with. I don't have a green wallet over here where out of the green wallet, I spend money on the comic books, and then I open up the red wallet. I've got another wallet of the red wallet, and I spend money out of the red wallet on the video games. I got one wallet, folks, and I got one budget. So when I go into the big time Heritage auctions and I'm buying some of these video games, I'm spending less on the comic books. It's just a fact, right? I'm just have a certain amount of dollars that I'm gonna go after material with that particular budget, and a lot of other collectors are too, and it makes a difference. Only Heritage and your rabbi really knows for sure, because Heritage clearly has access to the user data and can tell. If they looked at my record, they could see, oh, in 2019, this collector spent X amount of dollars on comic books, and he also picked up, for some weird reason, a couple rock posters, right? So he spent 95% of his money on the comic books. Oh, look at this. In 2020, this collector has spent 70% of his money so far in the comic books, and he spent 30% in the games, right? They are targeting the same collector. I think it's easier for a comic book collector to grok this space in this category. I mean, it has been for me. I mean, for one thing, there's the grades. I mean, give me a break, a 9.6, right? I mean, I instantly know what a 9.6 is with a book. You know, I know what a 9.2 is, I know what a 7.5 is. We all know these grades. Like, we've been working with this grade system that CBCS uses as well, in addition to CGC, for years. And they use the same system with the graded games, right? So you can quite easily start to get your head around what's happening in this space. And I don't know many comic book collectors, serious comic book collectors. I really don't know any that in the last 3 to 4, let's say in the last 6 to 9 months, that have all of a sudden just developed a passion for Magic the Gathering. Like they saw maybe Rudy's videos on YouTube, or they saw some auctions on Certified Link, and they just thought, I'm gonna get into this category, right? Not at all. I don't know anyone in the comic space that I'm dealing with actively that is also in Magic. And Magic's a great category, but it's somewhat of a category unto itself. It's separate even from Pokemon. And also with Pokemon, which has gone a little bonanza lately, I don't know very many or any comic collectors that all of a sudden in the last 6 to 9 months or in the last year have just developed this overnight overwhelming passion for PSA graded Pokemon cards, and they got to go out and they got to get a mint condition Charizard from the base set, and they're sitting there at night reading the difference between Shadowless and Unlimited, and buying sealed booster box from Genesis and all these other sets that came out over the years, they don't know that stuff, right? They're not in those categories, rarely, right? However, let's take the same use case of the comic book collector over the last 6 to 12 months that has all of a sudden picked up a considerable interest in participating in this category. Hell yeah. Hell yes. I mean, I can just tell you, just go to the CGC boards itself, and there are folks that are writing about this material. If you go to the WADA use groups on Facebook, there's a lot of folks there that are comic collectors and comic dealers, and hallelujah, collect all the damn things you want. But you are robbing Peter a little bit to pay Paul with respect to pricing, in my opinion. Now, again, it's hard because I am not an employee of Comic Connect, or Heritage. I can't really tell you what the data says. So who knows? Maybe the two fields, there's just so much money in collectible comics. There's so much money with other folks that buy the gaming stuff that the markets are not mixed, that they don't impact one another. I happen to think they do. And for the other reasons I mentioned to you, right? The lack of production of the Hollywood movies, the hangover after the Avengers, all those things came into play. All right, let's finish the video by looking at some comic books, because I'm getting blinded by the light here. It is getting a little hot in this studio. And these are just recent purchases that I picked up. Where else? Comic Link. You know, Comic Link's been pretty great lately, I think, for buying a lot of material that is relatively inexpensive and very valuable. So I go after as much as possible mid to high grade pre-code horror books that are not classic covers. The classic covers are just so expensive. I can really participate in this space in the several hundreds of dollars, and these are really hard to come by. There's not a lot of books in the census. A lot of this material, as you may be aware, was burned, was destroyed prior to the introduction of the comic code, right? And that's what makes some of these books special. I mean, sure, a lot of the Golden Age stuff was reduced to pulp during the paper drives during the Second World War. They would go around house to house and collect material, paper, for the war drive. And so parents that were at home would go into the basement and they would get the magazines, the Look magazines, the Vogues, the newspapers they collected, Junior's comic book collection, and they would donate it. In fact, a good friend of mine that's a collector in the comic space, very active on the CGC boards, you would know who he is, inherited most of his comic book collection from his father, who bought the material off the newsstand. It's remarkable. He has this original owner collection, which how incredible is it? It's your father. And they've got the pencil marks on the books from the one grocery store where he bought almost all of his comics. And he read them once and very carefully turned the pages, and they're in incredible condition, a lot of these horror books. He tells a story when his father was a younger man during the Second World War, right? In the mid 1940s in San Jose, California. They were doing paper drives, right? And he was not home that day, the parents were. And they sent around these kids on bicycles, you know, with big baskets, or someone would come by in a vehicle, and they would go to the house and they would collect paper for the war, the paper drive. And so they went there, and the parents said, oh yeah, we've got a bunch of comic books. And they let them in, and they went down to the basement, and they started tearing, you know, looking through the stuff. And then my buddy's dad came home, and he said, oh my God, what the hell are you doing here? You're taking my comic books. And they're like, oh, well, you know, your parents said we could take the books. He said, no, we're keeping them. They're not being reduced to pulp. And so he saved his collection. But interestingly, some of the kids that went to collect those books asked my buddy's dad if they could take some with them, and he said, sure, what do you want? Of course, they were picking up early Superman, early Detective Comics, all the seminal books, but that, you know, that's what makes that stuff storied and rare. And so I started to get into the horror category. A lot of the reason because I was introduced to those books through my buddy and the story he told me about his dad collecting this stuff, so I got into it. And they're kick-ass. I mean, when these books are in hand, they're really fantastic. Here's an Adventures into Terror from the early 50s in 5.5. I picked this up off Clink comic link. And here's A Tomb of Terror. This is an underrated book in my opinion. I like mummy covers, and it's a fantastic depiction of this lady in the arms of the mummy. That about rounds it up. You know, I really wanted to spend this time talking about some of the interesting trends that have been going on in the collectible comic space, and then what's going on in the collectible game space. And like I said, heck, I am no expert probably in either category. I know more about the comic books. So you know what? Form your own opinions, do a lot of research, become informed. If you play games, I think that adds to the enrichment of collecting them, just as it does if you like the superheroes. I find it hard to imagine that someone would be really excited about collecting video games if they didn't play them at one point in time. I still play video games on modern consoles. I'm going to probably play some sessions after this video. So hey, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Subscribe, leave a comment, holler, be well.